Chapter 3, Too Much of a Good Thing, Part 3. There was a small town not far from the Gilet mine, a quiet place with not much in the way of industry or problems. At least, it used to be. At the moment, it was the gathering point for soldiers from neighboring towns keeping a lookout for the Natra army. The air was tense, and security was tight. Those with means and connections took refuge far away, but others continued to live their lives on bated breath. Anyone openly traveling through the town was either an eccentric or under unique circumstances. Jiva was surely the latter. He was staying in a room at an inn that had seen some better days. And that concludes my report on the mine residents. I see. You've done well. 2 men were in the room. One was the Marden diplomat, Jiva. The other was his personal spy. Jiva had sent him to Natra's base camp to feel out if they'd be willing to talk, while he ventured into town to set up the negotiating table. He received reports from the spy a few days later, but he couldn't believe his ears. To think the people of the mine were treated so cruelly, the plain chair in the room creaked as Jiva hung his head. Sure, he'd heard the rumors that the miners were treated inhumanely, relentlessly used for what they're worth. But the mine had been fully entrusted to Hollinger, and the Mahdia had never been able to question him, especially because he always turned a profit. No, that's not the only reason. They probably pulled the Mahdia's top brass over to their side. On top of holding the country's purse strings, Hollinger's men were skilled in instigating political strife. It wouldn't be difficult to cajole the Mahdia when it came down to matters like this. And if the leadership kept quiet, the underlings would never get a chance to say a word. That was the position Jiva was in. As for those who tried to step outside the line, well, they naturally disappeared before getting very far. You're sure Natra isn't forcing them to work, right? Jiva confirmed. Yes. On the contrary. They're providing food and housing. With all due respect, sir, their hearts no longer belong to Marden. Yes, I thought as much. Of course, they'd never have any loyalty to a country that essentially treated them like slaves. To the residents, Marden was a vicious ruler and Natra, their liberator. Their crown prince. I've always heard he's a righteous and benevolent young man, but it seems the rumors are true. How are their troops looking? It appears they're investigating the surrounding area to understand its geography. They've only laid the groundwork, but they've taken steps toward building a fortress. Natra was getting ready to fight against Marden by fortifying their defenses. It wasn't possible to approach this lightly anymore. Jiva made a decision. I have no choice but to go speak with them as an emissary. That could be dangerous. As things stand, you could be killed. There won't be any progress if I can't overcome this much. Let's hope we can count on the prince's benevolence. Determination in hand, Jiva began preparing for his journey to the gold mine. Meanwhile, Wine gave a deathly moan and collapsed onto his desk. UF. It was hard to believe this was the same guy the Marden diplomat was giving such high praise. Don't slack off. Come on, pull yourself together, Ninim said. But her voice didn't carry its usual power or vigor. For once, her feelings were on the same page as Wine's. It's drying up. Dry as bones. Yeah, just my luck. This had to happen right now. We came all the way over here, stole the mine, and went to freakin' war with Marden over it. Then, right when we thought we've won, the whole thing turns to shit. Why is this happening to me? Ever since he received the map, Wine had begun thoroughly investigating the authenticity of Peelin's documents. The results came back positive. There was no mistaking it. The gold mine was about to run out of ore. Of course he was in despair. If he was the only one involved, this could be laughed off with a slap on the knee. But that wasn't how national strategy worked. Who was going to forgive him with a hoopsie-daisy and a bop on the head for something of this magnitude? But we can't afford to sit around and do nothing, Ninim lamented, outwardly directing this at Wine, but saying it to herself. We have to decide what to do next. Yeah, we've got no choice but to withdraw, right? Wine said sullenly, lifting his face slightly off the desk. We fought because we thought this mine was worth something. That was the whole point of taking and defending it, to preserve its value. But now that it's not even worth a single gold piece, we're better off doing damage control and washing our hands of this place as quickly as possible. It was logical. Even as they sat here discussing business, the army had running expenses to consider, and they were especially high due to being in enemy territory. The sooner they got out, the better. Then what about our promise? The one we made to Peelant to look after his people. He was only talking about people. He didn't mention the mine. We'll just take anyone who wants to come along. I mean, our kingdom is a melting pot to begin with, built by people who had no other future. These guys aren't any different. Folding them into our mishmash country isn't going to upset anything. That's true. She contemplated, nodding. Should we inform the miners and prepare to withdraw? No, not yet. Why's that? There's definitely gonna be some complaints if we back out now. If he made the executive decision to genuinely hand this land back over, he'd certainly affect the army and the nation's pride. At the very least, they needed to come up with some kind of justification. Shouldn't we tell the troops the truth? If you're hellbent on not telling everyone, maybe we can at least share it with the commanding officers. Sooner or later, news will make its way down to the soldiers. Then their confidence in me will really tank. If we're not careful, some of them might take their anger out on the miners. So, we're lame ducks until Marden sends their army. Yeah, they'll send us a nice, big, fat group of soldiers to take back the mine. When our men see they're clearly stronger, we'll all agree to withdraw. I think. Thanks to a growing list of surprises, twists, and turns, this half-baked plan was the best he could come up with. What about selling it to another country, without letting them know the mine is no good? Cavallino, maybe? Ninim suggested. According to Peelant, the mine had been entrusted to Hollier. As the documents passed through the hands of government officials, they each took care to report the profit slightly higher than it actually was so they could embezzle even more money. It was very possible Hollier himself didn't even know what was accurate at this point. Meaning Peelant, Wine, Ninim, and the others present at that previous meeting were the only ones who knew about the gold mine's dismal condition. They could sell it to another country in a standard case of adverse selection. It wasn't totally out of the realm of possibility. It won't be easy to get together and sort this out. There isn't enough time for that. And we'll have to go up against Marden if we take too long. If that happens, we can pretty much kiss any profit goodbye. And there's definitely going to be some hard feelings if they ever find out. It was a tough choice. It was hard to let go of the place they'd fought so hard for. Where could we find a buyer for this sort of thing? The gears in Wine's head started to turn, only to be suddenly interrupted by a commotion outside the building. I wonder what that could be? Ninim asked. Peeking outside the window together, he saw a group of soldiers hurriedly rushing back and forth. Just as he thought they were under an enemy attack, a knock came at the door. Apologies, Your Highness. Slightly out of breath, Raklam appeared before them. Wine immediately fired off his most urgent question. Is the enemy attacking? No, Wine urged him to continue with a look. Well, what is it? It's an emissary. An emissary from Marden has arrived. Wine's eyes widened, but not because of the news. He'd been hit with a sudden stroke of inspiration. Raklam continued. He's requesting a meeting with Your Highness. What shall we do? Did he give his name? What's he look like? He said his name was Jiva, a diplomat from Marden. Based on his demeanor, there's no question he's a high-level government official. Sounds kind of familiar. You know him, Ninim? Yes. I recall he's a member of the royal court. All right, Raklam. Guide him to the reception room. I'll be there soon. Be on your best behavior. Understood. Raklam promptly turned on his heel and lumbered out of the room. Ninim, I'd like you to make our guest feel comfortable. I'll see to it, Emidia. She stopped mid-word upon seeing her master's expression. What's wrong, Wine? You're making an odd face. No, it's all clear to me now. What are you talking about? Wine grinned. We've got a buyer for the mine. Jiva was led to the reception room and waited patiently in a chair. At first glance, he might have appeared meditative, quietly sitting with his eyes closed, but a bit of nervousness surfaced onto his round face. But this wasn't strange in the slightest. After all, from his point of view, he was in the middle of enemy territory. It was common for emissaries to be killed, even if they were sent to negotiate. There was a distinct possibility that armed soldiers were gathering outside the room at that very moment. But I think I'll be okay. If they wanted to kill him, they would have already made their move. Plus, considering his status and the crown prince's alleged benevolence, they could probably have a discussion at the very least. Reaching an agreement is going to be our biggest problem. If anything was making him nervous now, that was it. He'd prioritized time and hardly researched his opponent. He knew only bits and pieces, and it wasn't clear if this was for better or worse. As these worries filled his mind, the door swung open to reveal a girl with translucent white hair and red eyes. A Flom. Come to think of it, he'd heard they were common in Natra. His Highness Prince Regent Wine has arrived. A young boy stepped into the room following after her and accompanied by several guards. It is an honor to meet you, Your Highness, Jiva extolled, bowing reverently. I am a diplomat of Marden, Jiva. And I'm the Prince Regent of the Kingdom of Natra, Wine Salima Arbalest. He's so young. Jiva had heard the prince was in his mid-teens, but he still had the look of an innocent child as he stood there in front of him. But his demeanor was dignified with the air of a proud leader. He wasn't some decoration or symbol or king due only to blood. Jiva wouldn't be forgetting that anytime soon. First of all, please accept my most humble apologies for appearing unannounced, Your Highness, he began courteously. They were facing each other across a desk. Ninim was taking notes behind Wine. The prince responded diplomatically. We understand that some problems require our immediate attention, which is why I'd like to wholeheartedly welcome you for coming all the way here, he said, then shrugged his shoulders. But it happened a little too quickly, so we weren't ready to receive any guests. My apologies. This was the only room available. I would have liked to prepare a more formal setting. Thank you for extending such hospitality to me, Your Highness. It was my own folly for not informing you earlier. Even if you greeted me in an empty field, I would be overcome with gratitude. I appreciate you saying that. Wine broke into a smile as if talking to a close friend. Jiva could see why the people of Natra loved him. But he wouldn't be swayed. After all, he was a man of Marden, and the battle between the two had just begun. So then, Lord Jiva, what has brought you to us today? You must know this territory isn't very friendly to Marden citizens at the moment. There it was. The heart of the issue. Jiva gritted his teeth for a moment. Yes, of course, Jiva started. In place of an army, I've come to express our appreciation. Thank you for taking on the responsibility of guarding this land. We are so grateful that you're willing to discuss how we can transfer the ownership of this gold mine back to us. Upon hearing his words, Ninim and the guards gave the same speculative expression. Say what? If he'd boldly ordered them to give back the mine, the soldiers would have been ready to end his life. Sure, but he said the last thing they expected to hear. Even Wine was surprised by this turn of events. But here's what separated him from the rest. Yes, I see. Your mind is set. While everyone stood there dumbfounded, Wine saw through his intentions in an instant. Ninim scribbled down a question on a piece of paper. Wine, what's going on? He's basically saying, let's pretend none of this happened. His writing was smooth, fluid. She frowned for a few seconds, then realization dawned on her face. He gave her a secret little smirk. Marden wanted the gold mine back as soon as possible. But any negotiating would undoubtedly drag on forever as they worked out reparations, exchanging prisoners of war, and redefining country borders, among other things, all while dancing around the topic of Marden's previous acts of aggression and violence toward Natra. Looks like he's jumping right to the part where our countries forgive and forget. This tubby guy may not look it, but he pulls no punches. It could also be a way of erasing the truth of their defeat, helping their prideful King Fishtar save face. It was a pretty brilliant move. There are no words to describe our gratitude for safeguarding this area from neighboring countries like Kavalina. These enemies continue to threaten us from all sides. We would like to offer you a reward as an expression of our gratitude. Of course, this so-called reward was nothing more than reparations and a buyout. There'd be some arguing over exactly how much it'd amount to in total, but so far, things were going more smoothly than your average post-war negotiation. While this proposal seemed to cede more advantages to Marden, there were obvious merits for Natra as well. You've really saved us. This gold mine is our country's life force, you see. If it was stolen by a foreign power, Oh, we just might need to unleash our wrath and mercilessly destroy that enemy nation, Jiva said. This was one such merit. Evading war with Mardin was a pretty good deal. Natra might have won the battle in the Polta wasteland. But what about the next battle? And if they won again, the battle after that? When it came to their military strength, Natra was at an obvious disadvantage. At some point, their country would hit its limit. Even if they held out against Mardin, another country would find an opportunity to attack. Of course, Mardin was dealing with the same problem, but Wine had some serious doubts as to whether King Fishtar could weigh the risks, even if he tried. Fishtar is all about pride. No matter how many times he loses, he'll get back up again. Another defeat will just piss him off. Sorry, but I've got zero interest in going down together. It wasn't such a bad idea to erase this battle from history. Without the shame of losing, there was a good chance their king would calm down for at least a while. In that time, Natra could use the money they swindled out of Mardin and increase their military strength. Well, there were some disadvantages too. To start, their patriotism and price would be bruised. The troops would not be very happy to hear this, seeing that their battle honors would be redacted alongside the war itself. And if Mardin compensated them monetarily, it'd leave a bad aftertaste in everyone's mouth. But there was still enough reason to accept Jiva's proposal. It's basically confirmed. Mardin has no idea the mine's drying up. Only a few others knew the whole truth. If he continued to wait for another solution, his luck would run out eventually, meaning his men's confidence in him would plummet. On the other hand, it was obvious they'd be mad if the gold mine was sold to another country. But what if they sold it back to Mardin right now? He could give it back before having a chance to profit from it. That meant he wouldn't be held accountable, even if the truth about the dwindling value of the mine was discovered. Instead, conflict would break out in Mardin's inner circle. And if Mardin said they wanted a refund, Natra could feign ignorance. He'd initially lose the respect of his soldiers, but they might reevaluate his actions if they knew the truth. This is my only chance to avoid war and swindle them out of a ton of money. Are you going to go with his proposal? Ninim wrote. Yeah, but if we take their bait too soon, they'll know we're hiding something. We gotta act unsure for a bit, Wine responded. Don't get too greedy, she warned. It'll be fine. I won't do anything to tip them off. She gave him an uneasy look, but Wine just flashed a confident grin in return. I can't read him. As far as Jiva was concerned, the proposal he offered was his last resort. If he had more time or a bit more generosity from King Fishtar, he could have found another way. But this was the only way he could reconcile with any actual substance and still satisfy his king. Jiva knew he'd been dominating the conversation, precisely because he understood it would be difficult to accept such a proposal. He was trying his best to smooth things over. But could this ploy actually work? Across from Jiva, the boy stared in silence. No words could faze Wine. His gaze bore straight into his opponent's eyes. It's like hammering away at a steel sculpture with a wooden mallet. But I can't back down now. No, he mustn't back down. Those were his feelings, but Jiva trembled in spite of himself. His journey to the mine was flickering before his mind's eye. The people of the mine dressed in tatters. The soldiers of Natra feeding them rations. Once their troops were gone, what would happen to the residents? When the Mardin returned to this territory, would they still be treated like humans? God, what am I thinking? We need to get back the gold mine. I need to do all I can to make that happen. This is going fine, just fine. As Jiva reassured himself over and over, Wine started to stir. Livy. Jiva wasn't sure he heard him correctly and looked on in confusion. Wine continued. Sefti, Regis, Talfia, Carol, your Highness. What are you saying? Names, he explained coldly, his voice piercing through Jiva. Names of my men who died in the Polta wasteland. Jiva felt like his own heart might leap out of his chest. What an unimaginably compassionate ruler. Many of his subjects held Wine in high regard. Jiva knew this. I hear your proposal. That might be one possible interpretation of this entire situation. But Lord Jiva, in that case, where should the souls of my men rest? What should be marked on the graves of those who died serving their country? That's You're not suggesting we right here lies some idiot who died in the wasteland on their graves, are you? Under Wine's steady gaze and kingly presence, Jiva was unable to form a coherent sentence. Upon this sight, Wine cheered in his heart. All right, it's working. But Ninim appeared sullen. Isn't it working too well? She wrote. If this negotiation falls through, won't things end up as the opposite of what you want? Nah, this much is normal. Actually, I want to give him just one more push, he scribbled back. Fortunately, Wine could pass for a kind and generous ruler. He knew he could persuade Jiva if he mentioned his own soldiers and citizens. The more difficult he made the negotiation, the larger the gold on the other side. Lord Jiva, do you realize how the people here have been treated? Yes. Not too long ago, one of their representatives came to me with an appeal. He asked us not to abandon his people. He made this request to Netra, not Martin. You know what this means, right? It was enough for us to imagine the treatment they'd suffered under your hands. Suppose we returned the mine. What would become of these people? If you snatch away their last hope, they'll be left with only despair. With all that said, I'll ask you one more time. What brought you here, Lord Jiva? Become someone noble. Jiva suddenly remembered the words his mother used to say to him. It was a faint memory. He'd pushed it away to avoid looking back at the boy who'd been bullied. During that time, he did his best to keep his mouth shut until he could go home and pretend everything was fine. But his mother saw right through him. Become someone noble. Be someone your future self can be proud of. These were the words that pierced his heart, and he'd made up his mind. He would live a life he wouldn't be ashamed to look back on in 10, 20, 30 years. That's how it should have been anyway. But then he was faced with failure. Pressure. Self-preservation. Fighting. Before he realized it, he'd lost touch of those childhood dreams and traveled down a path far from light. That's just how it was. He'd made excuses, telling himself ideals were ideals because they were unattainable. But the young prince was in a far more difficult position, and yet, he didn't hesitate or falter when it came to protecting his people. Prince Wine. What? Before I answer, I'd like you to allow me a single question. Very well. Wine's eyes didn't contain a glimmer of a doubt. They radiantly gazed forward. The person standing behind you, Prince Wine. What is her relation to you? Jiva was thinking back to a memory of a young boy. He had the same translucent hair as the Flom girl in front of him. That boy had been a Flom, too, and had been persecuted for it. What made him think of that day now? Jiva finally knew the answer. Ninim is my heart. I wanted to be like him, Jiva thought. What kind of question is that? While Wine maintained his confident tone, Jiva's question made him cock his head in confusion. He tried to get a read on the diplomat, but Jiva had bowed his head, hiding his expression. Wine and Ninim used it as a chance to pass a few more notes between themselves. Maybe I'm a rare sight? Ninim suggested. In the West, Flum would never be present during diplomatic negotiations. Then he would have brought it up sooner or with more emotion, Wine replied. True. Maybe he's impressed you don't discriminate between citizens, soldiers, or Flum. Haha, so it's simply because this diplomat is so incredibly empathetic? No way that's the reason. But if you're right, then he might not want to continue negotiating. It'll be fine. If that happens, I'll eat a potato through my nose. As Wine joked in an easygoing reply, Jiva quietly raised his head across the way. Your Highness, I understand how your heart must feel. Jiva's expression was clearer, less burdened or weighed down by something. Please forgive me for disrespecting those fallen in battle. It seems I've misunderstood. Wine felt something was off, but Jiva continued on. There was blood spilled in your country's name. You fought to claim this land for Netra. You're determined to protect the citizens. It is all too clear we must take up our bows and arrows. What? I imagine this will be my final job in foreign affairs. But I won't waste a minute in informing King Fishtar of your steadfastness. Why, well then, Your Highness, I must make haste to the royal palace. Please allow me to say it was truly an honor to hear your personal anecdotes and exchange words with you. Jiva bowed deeply and hurriedly excused himself from the room. Wine and Ninim stared until his back disappeared. They finally lifted their gaze, petrified for some time, and locked eyes. Ninim. I'll go get the potato. Those were her only words.